One thing about me, if you have noticed over the past few years, is that I watch a lot of anime. Hell, during the Best of 2023 list, I watched so much that year that the number roll looked like a fucking art installation. I mentioned during the Best of 2025's dishonorable mention section that, honestly, I think I'm gonna make a separate video about this one, dear lord. Lazarus is the latest entry in the work of creative visionary Shinichiro Watanabe. Watanabe is an interesting figure in the landscape of anime. You have auteurs who people swear have never made a bad show or movie in their life, like Satoshi Kon. You have guys who have had a few misses, but generally are considered excellent at their craft, such as Hayao Miyazaki. You have bottom-of-the-barrel guys who you wonder how the fuck they even get work to begin with. And then you have Watanabe, a man who lost his fastball. I don't know if there's any overlap between people who watch my videos and people who enjoy sports, but there's this phenomenon in sports that is the most heartbreaking thing to witness. A player, whether they be a favorite of yours or a rival, it's to see their slow, agonizing decline into being a liability for their team. Or worse, to see someone who's at the top of the world in one moment suddenly become the poster boy for one of the worst players in the league. Watanabe is washed. It's to be determined if my GOAT will be able to recover from this, but I think Lazarus was such a spectacularly bad fuck-up that it really cements this fact. Watanabe's directorial debut began with a fantastic series in Macross Plus. He then followed this up with an insane run: Cowboy Bebop, Samurai Champloo, Kids on the Slope, Space Dandy. Where Watanabe's work is considered to have gotten worse is subjective, obviously. Some say it started with Kids on the Slope, but I would like to argue that while it was still a pretty decent show, I think Terror and Resonance isn't on the level that the previous works were. To once again continue the analogy to sports, this is where you see the velocity dip. What was once a 95-mile-an-hour fastball just barely scratches 90 consistently. Carol and Tuesday is another show that, while not bad, just was so poor in its execution, it's hard to justify giving it anything higher than like a 7 out of 10. This is where we begin to see the off-speeds just not landing in the zone. The ball just isn't ending up where he wants it to anymore. And then we have Lazarus, where I can genuinely say there's no juice in that arm. Watanabe's figurative pitcher's arm is no longer the feared cannon it once was. He can barely lift it. It just hurts to fucking exist. This is what Lazarus felt like. It's a show that reminds you of what the person who directed it used to be. Faint moments and glimpses into a past that has been long written in the record books, awaiting to be placed on the shelf. It may not be the final pitch recorded by this once golden arm, but it's the final one on the books for now. So, let's take a look at exactly why Lazarus failed. People, especially here in the Western world of anime, are naturally going to compare Lazarus to Watanabe's biggest work in the West, Cowboy Bebop. However, not just because I am a Lupin fan, but because Watanabe is. He literally worked on one of the fucking shows. I think it's an interesting thing to compare Lazarus to a bunch of different works that might have either influenced Watanabe or were influenced by him. Lazarus is an interesting show in that it does not have one singular problem. If it were easy as saying, it was a good show, but the ending was a bit shit in it, then we wouldn't have a show to even discuss. Plenty of shows have one defining part about them that ends up dragging the whole of it down. However, for Lazarus, it's almost an oxymoron. The characters seem cool, they have no substance. The plot seems interesting, it ends up being way more contrived than you expected. The show presents deeper themes and poses potentially thought-provoking discussions. None of them are ever explored or go anywhere. This is chiefly what the main problem with the show is. It's not a Cowboy Bebop quote-unquote show about nothing, it's not even a Lupin show about nothing. This show is legitimately a nothing burger. You watch it and will experience nothing at the end of it. Before I go on an even bigger rant, let's take time to dissect two of the biggest reasons as to why I think this show sucks. Part of what made previous Watanabe shows so successful was the ability to weave an overarching plot into larger episodic series. We know Mugen, Jin, and Fu are on a quest to find the Sunflower Samurai, but not every episode is dedicated to that goal or even mentions it. We know Spike is ultimately going to fight Vicious, but not every episode of the show is about that. Lazarus is a show that seemingly will have a giant, huge mecha plot if you only watched episode 1. And look, don't get me wrong here, I'm a Lupin fan. I fucking love episodic series. But holy fuck, if there was ever a show that did not need to be episodic, it was Lazarus. It not only serves as a detriment to the effectiveness of the storytelling, it makes the stakes in the show so hard to gauge. We're made aware from episode 1 that famous neuroscientist Dr. Dennis Skinner released a drug called Hapna that apparently relieves pretty much anything. It becomes super popular, basically the entire population of Earth takes this thing, and he reveals 3 years later that, surprise, this miracle cure drug is actually a fuck you drug, and is going to literally kill any person who took it. In response to this, the Lazarus team is formed. I didn't get it, because Lazarus resurrected. The goal of the team is to locate Skinner and force him to give up the antidote to the drug. Naturally, you would assume then that the story is hell-bent on the team trying to find Skinner, piecing together mysteries and clues and doing whatever they can to find him. I mean, yes, but like, no? Here's the thing. While yes, every episode does in some capacity acknowledge what the ultimate goal is, literally every episode is so self-contained to the point that I didn't even notice that time was progressing until like fucking episode 5. When I tell you, the amount of times me and my wife sat on the couch watching this show and going, that was neat, but when the fuck is the plot gonna actually do something? And look, yes, I am aware that at the end of every episode, it would say something like 15 days left, but it never felt like that due to the lack of urgency of these fucks. Like, oh my fucking Christ! As I mentioned earlier, the stakes in the show are so hard to gauge because the cast acts so damn cavalier towards everything that it makes me wonder if they're thinking, I mean, yeah, we're all gonna die soon, but you know, we have a buffer of at least a few months so we can go off party with Skrillex and shit. But they don't! Like, people start croaking in episode 1. The show makes it very fucking clear that they do not have any time to mess around. They need to be on their dick and balls going out solving shit now, and they just don't. Literally, the formula for most episodes is the team has a meeting, a certain character the show wants to focus on giving some backstory for some reason decides to do a thing. The thing happens, the gang realizes, damn, we haven't found Skinner, and the episode just ends with a, aw shucks, but we'll get him next time. But why? Like, you can have just a regular straight mystery show. We did not need to have this show be episodic because it makes the viewer unable to get invested in the plot. Moreover, the show dedicates way too much time trying to give the characters of the story some exposition for why they're here to begin with, which is fine. Some of the best episodes in Bebop were when we saw Spike's past, but here's where the story falters so deeply, and it's exactly due to the format of the show. The show, quite frankly, didn't really need to expand on its characters a whole lot. The hook of the show is intriguing enough that it kept me watching for 13 episodes. Lupin has proved that while, yes, the backstory of a character can be a fascinating thing to look into, if the character is fun and well written enough, you can just put them in any scenario and it'll work. I love The Woman Called Fujiko Mine. It's such a fascinating and beautiful dissection of a character and why it is she does the things she does. You know what else I like though? Fujiko just being a straight bitch in part 2 and for no real reason. If a character is compelling, you don't have to show all their cards, which is what leads me to the next reason as to why Lazarus sucks. Spike, Mugen, Dandy, Jet, Jin, QT, Faye, Fu. I mean, on and on. The earlier works of Watanabe are so fantastic in depicting its characters. Holy shit, does Lazarus suck at it! The main cast of 5 people, bigger than any of the previous crews made by Watanabe, are all so fucking boring. To call them characters implies that they have actual personalities. They do not. They are literally just fucking clones of Watanabe's other works. Axel, he's Lupin and Spike. Doug, he's Jin. Chris, literally just fucking Fujiko and Faye. The other two aren't specifically reminiscent of other Watanabe related stuff, but they're also painfully one-note. Leland, he's a dipshit teenager. Elena, throw a dart at the board at your favorite coup d'oeil, they're almost exactly the fucking same. The lack of personalities to any of these characters makes it so damn hard to give a shit about any one of them. Axel, for example, is one of the few characters who actually isn't given much backstory. We know he was in prison because he broke out of it in a dope-ass action scene in episode 1. That's literally it. I can't remember a single thing notable about the dude besides that. He's good at parkour and fighting. Gee, where have I seen this before? Doug is given a bit more backstory, but like you'll find with most of the cast, it's not explored in a way that makes you feel anything towards him. It's like if you found out just now that I'm left-handed. Does that change your opinion of me in any way? Probably not. It's briefly mentioned something about Doug being a black man in a field that has not presented opportunities to other black people, but it doesn't really go much of anywhere. It could have been a fantastic opportunity to bring up how unfairly black people have been treated, not only by the scientific community, but society at large. But the show doesn't care to actually say anything or give a message worth anything. It just wants to acknowledge that a struggle exists, and it assumes based off of that it's enough for me to care. Chris is given an entire episode explaining her backstory that amounts to she was a Russian operative who faked her own death so her girlfriend wouldn't be accused of being a traitor. And Chris's backstory is probably the best executed of all of them, but it felt so out of left field, and they don't touch on it again really, that you're just kind of left feeling like, well, that happened. Leland is mentioned to be the son of a high-class family, but is a failure in their eyes, which, I mean, I guess. The crown jewel of this show's inability to make you care about any of its characters, however, is Elena. Oh my fucking god, this girl. I want to draw a rather interesting comparison I don't think has been made before. Elena is essentially Ami from Lupin Part 5. The two are both naturally shy girls who are wizard computer hackers, just the cream of the crop in that field. However, Ami is, for lack of better phrasing, an actual fucking character. Both of these two girls went through really rough shit. Child sex trafficking in Ami's case, and being raised in a fucking cult in Elena's. Don't worry, we will get to that. However, these two girls cannot be more fucking different in how they approach the world, and part of that is due to the cast around them. Ami grows out of her shell and becomes a genuinely badass character who was such a treat to watch and develop over the course of the series. And mind you, Lupin Part 5, much like Lazarus, is exactly the same in storytelling style. Both are episodic with a larger overarching plot. However, one thing that you notice about the cast in the show is that none of the members actually affect anybody's lives. Like, Axel doesn't do anything for Doug, Doug doesn't do anything for Leland, Leland doesn't do anything for Chris, and like, Chris doesn't really do anything for Elena. Like, these characters, by the end of the show, are not that much different than they were at the beginning of it. And the key difference here is due to the open arms and appreciation that Lupin has for her and shows her throughout the show. So much so that by the end of it, she's fallen in love with him. Elena just doesn't grow as a character. She does step out of her shell a bit, but not to the point where she would actually be out there on the front lines trying to do shit. But she's a hacking specialist, why does that matter? So was fucking Ami, and she was still right there smack in the middle of the final battle. These two are literally if the same character was given to a shit writer and a good writer, because one of them is clearly so much more engaging to the actual plot because Ami is a part of the plot. It's a gripe I've alluded to briefly, but literally none of these characters' backstories do anything to advance the story. Exposition of who they are and why they're here, yeah, and maybe some do it better than others, but none of it matters to the overarching plot of the show. Ami matters because her father is the creator of the evil app that's about to take over the world introduced in episode 1. We don't find out until the latter half of the show that he's Ami's father, and yet the viewer is still emotionally invested regardless of that knowledge because she's a well-written character. I said I was going to talk about the cult, so here we go. What in the actual fuck was this about? What highlights the deficiency in caring about these fuckwads is the episode dedicated to Elena's backstory of how she grew up in a cult. A left field ball is one thing, but Jesus Christ, this is like getting T-boned at an intersection by a fucking nuclear missile. Here's why this episode and why these characters fail. What did this episode do? Did it advance the plot? Not really. The reason the cult is introduced is because Skinner for some reason visited the cult and it ends up being a nothing burger. Does it at least provide a good backstory for Elena? Also no. It tells us where she's from, but nothing of how the fuck she ended up as a hacker. Does it make the viewer care about Selena again. No, she leaves the episode not with remorse or even any feelings about her past other than just a, well, that sucked kind of attitude. All of these characters are like this. Too interesting to Watanabe to not give them backstories, but not well written enough to make the audience actually care. It's what brings me to my... There's something I've neglected to mention during this whole time, and that's that Lazarus is fucking awesome in what it does well. It's the main reason I give enough a shit about it to even want to write an entire video dedicated to it. The animation, fucking phenomenal, done by everyone's favorite sweatshop, Mappa. The action scenes, literally one of the few pitches left in Watanabe's arsenal that he still does well. Don't even get me started on the music done by Kamasi Washington, Bonobo, and Floating Points. Just a gorgeous soundtrack. It's the thing this show does well that makes it so painfully obvious in what it does wrong, and really where I think Watanabe went wrong here. The show clearly had a lot of effort put into it, but I don't know if it had a lot of love put into it. The story is such a slog to get through that by the ultimate conclusion in episode 13, everything just kind of fixes itself, and in a way that leaves such a deep sense of dissatisfaction watching the entire show. The hook alone, I mean, my god, episode 1 has to be one of the best episode 1s in anime, certainly in the top 30. The music, the fight scenes, the presentation, but what it doesn't have is the story to back it up. I'm gonna be blunt when I say this. This to me felt like for the first time, Watanabe went back to a formula rather than expanding and evolving it. Space Dandy morphed what had worked in Champloo to find its footing. Champloo only worked because it morphed what had worked in Bebop. This didn't feel like an expansion. It felt like Watanabe's attempt to do something that had worked before, to bring it back to sport analogies. It's like when a starting pitcher has clearly been left in the game for too long. I've been there before. In between every pitch is just fucking agony. What was once the biggest disgrace, being pulled off the mound for a relief pitcher, is now the only thing you want more in this world. But you're still up there for some godforsaken reason. So you think to yourself, all right, what the fuck can I even throw? Sometimes if you've had a particularly bad game, you might have only one pitch in your arsenal that hasn't been blasted outside the park in the last 2 innings. Watanabe is that pitcher. He's going back to the fastball. It hasn't worked in what seems like ages. This pitch isn't being thrown because he wants to throw it. It might be because it's the only one he's even able to throw at this point.